Hello, and welcome to the second to last lecture of the whole semester for Philosophy 100. I guess that this is the second to last week, and we're going to cover this week. We're going to talk about some issues in the philosophy of mind, and next week we're going to talk about some issues in philosophy of language. If you haven't read your email or seen the announcement, I'm planning for both of these weeks to record one lecture and post it onto Canvas, and I'd like you to watch it. And then on Fridays, the sort of this coming Friday and the last Friday of the course, we're going to have a live lecture where I discuss some more issues in the philosophy of language and mind. But then also, you guys, if you are available, can join in, can come to the Zoom class and actually hang out and ask questions, and we can discuss things, in a more real way and sort of celebrate the end of the semester. So, let's see. Other technical sort of details. Hopefully, you've turned in your third paper by now. It was due last night at midnight. Today is Tuesday when I'm recording this, so it was due Monday at midnight. And so, hopefully, you've finished your third paper. If you haven't finished your third paper, please do turn it in as soon as you can. Also, be sure to look back at any of your other papers. If things haven't been graded yet at this point, try to email me or look and see if there are comments on any papers in case I gave you comments about things that need to be changed, or if you need to resubmit your paper. And then also, yeah, if there's certain quizzes that you've left undone, take them soon, because there'll be two more, or maybe I'm not 100%. There'll either be one long quiz or two shorter quizzes at the end of each of these coming weeks before the end of the class. And yeah, that'll be the last two things that you'll have to do. And then hopefully I'll be able to finish grading your final papers before too long. All right, I believe that's everything. Let's get into the philosophy of mind. I'm subtitling this From Physicalism Back to Dualism. And that's partly because we were already kind of talking a little bit about the philosophy of mind in talking about personal identity, in talking about what we are, and in talking about, certain views of personal identity, in particular, views like the psychological view, the dualist view, and even the brain view. They're all kind of views in the philosophy of mind, and they all kind of have a little bit to do with physicalism and dualism. So remember dualism. We've got Rene Descartes to thank for dualism. Descartes famously claimed, "I think, therefore I am," and committed himself thereby to substance dualism, right? He thought that ultimately, essentially, he was a thinking thing, but that he wasn't essentially a body. He could imagine himself not being embodied. That is, he thought, an evil demon could be fooling him that he has a body, but an evil demon couldn't be fooling him that he was thinking. So he's an essentially thinking thing. So he thinks that there's got to be these two different substances, the thinking substance and the physical substance. So he commits himself to substance dualism. But again, dualism runs into a serious problem, the problem of explaining interactions between the mind and the body, or between the mental substance and the physical substance, between the mind and the world. So dualism has this huge problem that it needs to explain. Physicalism, on the other hand, kind of fills in the gap, right? So the idea is a lot of philosophers reject dualism because there is no mind-body interaction explanation on hand. So because there's no explanation of the mind-world interaction from dualism, philosophers tend, and I mean other people as well, like scientists, tend to think, okay, we don't need dualism. We don't need two different substances. Let's opt for monism. Monism says that there's just one particular substance out there, and that particular stuff is the physical stuff, right? So the monistic view that is most often accepted today is physicalism. And physicalism says that everything, even the mind, is ultimately made up of the physical substance. There's just one kind of stuff, physical stuff, and even the mind, whatever it is in some way made up of physical stuff. Now, while the dualist has the problem of interaction, that is because the dualist doesn't needs to offer an explanation of how minds and bodies interact. The physicalist has a different kind of problem. The physicalist has a problem of what we might call constitution. What is the problem of constitution? Well, if the dualist has these two different things, the mind and the body, and they're separate things and they interact, and they have to explain interaction. Well, the physicalist has this other problem. They say that there's this one kind of thing, the physical stuff, but that minds are ultimately a kind of physical thing. But then they have to say, well, what it is for a mind to be a physical thing. That is like what it is, like what kinds of physical stuff has to be going on for something to count as a mind. Right. I mean, it's like, everybody believes that, tables and chairs are physical things, but there's lots of different kinds of things that can be tables and chairs, right? You could use a tree stump as a chair. You can use a piece of metal to make a table. But these kinds of things, we can explain how you could take a physical stuff and shape it in the right kind of way to make a chair. But what kind of physical stuff? How could you possibly get physical stuff into the right shape and form to create a mind, to create the mental? What would that even look like? Well, here's a quick sort of history lesson from of over the last like 100 to 250 years. Um, just to sort of get you up to speed on some general background in the philosophy of mind, and some issues that were taken really seriously until more recently, and then we'll kind of get back to the more interesting recent philosophy of mind debates. So from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, there was lots of science that was being done in physics and psychology. I mean, more than that, but just physics and psychology were kind of both blossoming in certain ways. And people were really excited about physics, partly because so Einstein overturned the classic model, and we had this new super precise kind of mathematical physics that was really high powered. Chemistry was finished in this time period, right? We figured out what all of the different chemical substances were on the big chemical chart, and how they worked. We figured out that some of the the relationship between physics and chemistry, that certain kinds of atoms could be combined in certain ways, and that's how we get molecules. And then evolutionary biology also becomes kind of standardized, but probably in the early 1900s. We come to recognize, at least scientifically, that the living creatures that there are in the world are have evolved from other living creatures, and we don't need some kind of special magical life force to explain how it is that living things can live. We can explain life in terms of certain kinds of chemical reactions and responses that happen in biological creatures. So a certain kind of reductionism becomes really popular amongst both scientists and philosophers. By reductionism, I mean something like this. If it turns out that chemistry can be explained in terms of physics, then we don't have to sort of postulate a whole nother level of entities as existing at the level of the chemical substance, right? So if you've got a water molecule, well, what is a water molecule? Well, water molecule is a chemical kind that is made up of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, covalently bonded in certain ways, right? Well, so now what we've done there is we've reduced a chemical kind, H2O, water, to some physics terms, right? Some terms of physics talking about, the different two different kinds of atoms. I mean, and then, we haven't completed this yet, right? Because according to quantum mechanics, those two atoms are also composed of even smaller parts. So we haven't really reduced everything all the way down. But at the very least, you can see how we could take chemistry and talk about it in physics terms. Um, so the reductionism becomes really popular. And the thought is, oh, you know what we're going to be able to do? We're going to be able to reduce all of chemistry to physics, and then we're going to be able to reduce all of biology to chemistry, right? We're going to have this thing where it's like, oh, the reason that, this bodily function occurs in this way is because of this chemical kind or that chemical kind, or, that chemical reaction. And the thought goes, well, okay, so if we're going to be able to reduce chemistry to physics and biology to chemistry, then eventually we're going to also be able to reduce psychology to a special kind of like chemistry, maybe neurochemistry, chemistry that's going on in the brain. And so ultimately, psychology also, we like, talking about the mind, we're not going to need to talk about it in anything other than physical terms, right? Because the idea here is, or we that we'll ultimately be able to reduce psychology to a kind of biology, which is reducible to a kind of chemistry, which is reducible to a kind of physics. And so there we have it. It's going to turn out that psychology is also just physical. Now, there have been real big problems with this general picture of reductionism. The problem ultimately is that nobody's been able to find what we might call the bridge laws. And the bridge laws are, well, think about it this way. In physics, there are some really exceptionless laws. Like here, one of the laws of physics is that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And when you take these laws seriously, like you go out and you do experiments and you find out that they're perfectly confirmed, that there's no instances of anything out there in the world that goes faster than the speed of light. Now, when you take those laws and then you're trying to reduce things to them, well, so what you're thinking, like, oh, okay, so physics has these special exceptionless laws. Well, then if that's the model that you do science on, then you should think like, okay, well then chemistry also should have exceptionless laws. That is, certain kinds of laws of nature with respect to chemical kinds should be always true and should never change whatsoever. Um, the problem, though, is that reducing chemical laws to physical laws allows for lots of leeway and lots of kind of iffy situations where it doesn't look like the laws of nature, according to chemistry, are being followed. The same thing kind of goes at the level of biology when being reduced to chemistry, and at the level of psychology when being reduced to something like biology or chemistry, neurochemistry. So the bridge laws have turned out to be impossible to find or impossible to explain. So it's really difficult to say how exactly biology can really be reduced to chemistry in any kind of nice, tidy way, or how psychology could be reduced to biology in any kind of nice, tidy way. And so ultimately, this sort of reductionist program that a lot of physicalists have held to has become less and less popular. People are less and less convinced that we'll be able to actually reduce chemistry to physics and biology to chemistry. Yet, even though the bridge laws have been difficult to determine or find, physicalism is still widely held. The idea that everything ultimately reduces to the physical is still a widely held view. Now, different kinds of physicalism have been held, and the view itself has generally developed over time and gotten better and more interesting in certain ways. So here's here's three different views, the oldest to the youngest, that are held today. Mostly functionalism is the one that is pretty widely held today. So behaviorism was this view that Well, okay, so the mind, if we're trying to reduce the mind to just physical stuff, well, what is the mind? Behaviorism says, well, the mind isn't really a thing. There's just the body, and then there's the behavior of the body, right? There's the animal. The animal behaves in certain ways, and then what it is to have a mind is just to be describable in a certain way because the animal has a certain kind of behavior, right? Animals act in this way, that way, and in another way. And because of that, we describe animals as having beliefs, as having desires, as wanting things, as having hopes, as trying to do things from a mentalistic point of view. Now, behaviorism was kind of it was an interesting view and a very big research program. But people decided that it was a little bit problematic because behaviorism didn't explain what was going on inside the mind. And it really does seem like we have internal mental lives. So people took some interest in moving beyond behaviorism and moved on to what we might call a form of computationalism. Now, computationalism is the idea, and this basically starts with the invention of computer science as a whole. Computer science, when you come to realize how you can do programming and the relationship between what we might call the hardware and the software of a computer, well, you might think, oh, here's something that's really interesting. You can run software, a kind of program on hardware, a kind of physical thing that, has a bunch of wires connected to one another that send electrical impulses through different little gates. Right? There's a physical description or explanation that can be given to a computer's hardware, but we have to sort of know in a more abstract way what's going on at the software level to talk about, what's going on my computer screen right now or something like that, right? And so the computationalist view of the mind was to say, here we go. The mind is basically the software that is running on the hardware that is the brain. The brain is like the hardware of a computer, but the mind is the software. It's sort of what's happening at the higher level, of abstraction. And so really the mind is just kind of like a thought computer. It's the thing, it's doing the software, it's doing the computations, the calculations, it's running on the wetware that is the brain. Computationalism is really interesting, but it is a little bit short-sighted. So it's very unclear what it is to say that a person's mind is a kind of computer. So moving beyond computationalism, people now tend to accept a view called functionalism. That is, physicalists tend to accept a view called functionalism. Functionalism is the idea that the mind functions kind of like a computer insofar as there are different parts of the mind that have different functions. And the different functions function in certain ways and create certain inputs to one function and outputs to another function feed into one another. So, for example, a functionalist explanation of motivation. When it comes to being motivated, I have to have a certain desire for something and I have to have a certain belief for something. Suppose you observe me um, going out to lunch. Well, you probably are going to think, oh, Kyle must be hungry. And you'd be right, right? So if you observe me going out to lunch, then what you're probably thinking about me is that I have a particular desire for food and I have a particular belief about where food is. And you see me being motivated by these two different aspects, these two different functional parts of my own mind that interact in a certain way. My belief that, In and Out is over off of Turnpike and my desire for In and Out, those two parts of my mind function in a way to cause me to intend to go to In and Out, and then that creates some motivation for me to get off my butt in front of my computer and walk over to my car and drive over to In and Out. So functionalism is the kind of view that people tend to hold to today. The mind is kind of like a computer. It still is the idea that, the mind operates as something like the software on the hardware of the brain. But it's unclear, it's not exactly like a computer. The idea is just that there's different modules of the mind, and the different modules of the mind function in particular ways in relationship to one another. But while today many philosophers are physicalists, and in particular functionalists, there are things that seem left over that a functionalist version of physicalism just doesn't seem to be able to explain. And the main one of these cases, the main issue today, sort of the biggest problem that philosophers of mind face, is the problem of consciousness. The problem of consciousness is, at least the hard problem of consciousness, is thought to be a big problem for physicalist theories of mind. That is, theories of mind that say that the mind really is just a certain kind of physical thing. And the main problem of the problem of consciousness boils down to a thing called the problem of qualia. Qualia, here's sort of an explanation, right? So there's a special character, a kind of what it's like to be in a certain kind of mental state. So just think about that. Like, imagine what it's like for you to see red, right? Like, look at something red and think, okay, yeah, that's what it's like to see red. Think about what it's like to be in pain, right? Like, think about the feeling that you experience when you stub your toe. um, think about the feeling that you get when someone tickles you, the feeling of being tickled. That's each of those feelings are what it's like to be in a certain kind of mental state, right? The mental state of seeing red, the mental state of being in pain, the mental state of getting tickled. Now, and Nagel, Thomas Nagel, hopefully you've done the reading, What It's Like to Be a Bat, calls these kinds of what it's like states the subjective character of experience. That has been turned into nowadays what we would call the qualitative character of experience, or just for short, qualia. Um, Qualia is one of the most central and important features of our mental life. Everything that we experience has a qualitative aspect, has a what it's like feature, right? Right now, I'm looking at my computer screen. I am experiencing what it's like to look at my computer screen. I am experiencing what it's like to talk into the microphone on my computer in order to make this video right now. This is really central and really important to my whole experience of my life. It is also deeply mysterious. This brings us to What It's Like to Be a Bat by Thomas Nagel. So here's a picture of Thomas Nagel. He's a really interesting philosopher. Um, Here's the way that we should think about this. Bats experience the world in a fundamentally different way than you and I. Bats can see about as well as humans in daylight, but they rely primarily on their hearing to navigate and hunt in the dark. They do this by echolocation. That is, they emit a sound and use the sound's bouncing waves to understand things about their environment. They hear basically where the sound reverberates off of walls, off of objects, and it helps to guide them to avoid hitting walls and avoid hitting objects or catching their prey. Using echolocation, they can find out things about objects in their environment that we can only do by sight or maybe touch, right? Um, Bats can find out about distance. They can figure out how far away something is. They can figure out size. They can determine how big something is in front of them. They can determine shape. They even know where a thing is moving, and oftentimes even the texture of an object, all based on echolocation, all based on hearing something that they've projected out into the world. Here's a quote from Nagel: even without the benefit of philosophical reflection, Anyone who has spent some time in an enclosed space with an excited bat knows what it is to encounter a fundamentally alien form of life. Bat sonar, though clearly a form of perception, is not similar in its operation to any sense that we possess. And there is no reason to suppose that it is subjectively like anything we can experience or imagine. So now we know a lot about bat echolocation. We study bats. We have scientists that focus particularly on bats. In fact, there are other kinds of creatures that use echolocation. So there's lots of, people have studied echolocation. We know the principle behind echolocation. That is, we kind of know how it works. We know nearly everything about bat brains, right? Bats are akin to mice. We can, we don't feel so bad breeding them for scientific experiments. We can cut them open and we can determine how their brains work. We know pretty much everything about their auditory systems as well, and why their auditory systems are so sensitive and how they work. The issue, though, and the sort of general issue with qualia here is this. We can keep studying bats until we know every physical fact, and including all functional and computational facts, about bat brains and their sensory systems. We could know every physical fact. That would exhaust all of the facts that the physicalist believes exist. But according to Nagel, we still would not know what it's like to be a bat. Let me say that again. According to physicalism, the idea is everything, including all mental things, can be reduced in some sense to a bunch of physical facts, a bunch of facts about physical stuff. But on this objection, the idea is that we could study bats till for all of time. We could figure out every physical fact that we would ever be able to know about a bat. About bat echolocation, about how bats' brains work, about everything about bat sensory systems, etc. And yet, we would still not know what it's like to be a bat. No matter how much we study the physical nature of bats, we will never get at what it's like to be one. The only way to know what it's like to be a bat would be to do so firsthand. It would be to experience things the way a bat does. Suppose that somehow we could peek inside a bat's mind and find out what it's like to be a bat. Would that help us to derive or otherwise acquire or build an objective physical account of bat consciousness? The answer here seems to be no, right? Just because if you could imagine peering into someone else's conscious experiences, that wouldn't somehow add to our physical understanding of the universe. So the problem, it seems, goes in both directions. You can't derive all of the facts about consciousness from all the physical facts. You also can't derive the physical facts just from feeling what it's like to be a bat. If you were able to experience what it was like to be a bat, that wouldn't somehow give you new physical facts that you could know. Of course, we all know what it's like to be a human. And we can all study the corresponding neuroscience that corresponds with what it's like to be a human. That is, you can stick me in an fMRI machine and you can show me pictures of red things. And then you can take pictures of my brain as I'm seeing red things. And then you can figure out what it's, the correlation between the brain state that I'm in and the experience that I'm having, what it's like to see red. But even then, that just tells us that just helps us, we come to know what it's like to be us, but not because of scientific physicalist explanations, but by experiencing what it's like to be us. We have the experiences of, seeing red. But we can experience the taste of an apple, the taste of an In-N-Out hamburger. We can experience what it's like to swim underwater. And we can also do these things for, so like, imagine, you've got a blind person before you, and a blind person is asking you, what I mean, like, what it's like to experience the color red. Is there any kind of physical fact that you could offer to explain to a blind person that's never experienced red what it's like to experience red? Um, I don't think that you're going to be able to find anything. So there's an interesting question here. What is the relevant difference between something like imagining being blind, which is something that you can do, and imagining being a bat? Now, you might think you can imagine being a bat, and that would tell you what it's like to be a bat. Because you can imagine, like what it's like to hang upside down, or what it would be like to emit high pitched shrieks in order to navigate. But this doesn't actually get you to understanding what it would be like to be a bat. This gets you to understanding what it would like for you to behave as a bat behaves, right? The question isn't what is it like for a human to be a bat? The question is what is it like for a bat to be a bat? Right? What is it like for that small little creature with that kind of brain and that kind of echolocative ability? What is it like for that kind of creature to be the kind of creature that it is? What is it like to have bat consciousness? So here's kind of where we're getting at in thinking about Nagel. Experiences are clearly private. I have my experiences, you have your experiences. You can't have my particular experiences, and I can't have your particular experiences. We can have experiences of the same type, right? Like, I can eat an In-N-Out hamburger, you can eat an In-N-Out hamburger. We can both experience the pure joy that comes with eating In-N-Out hamburgers. But that's not all that's being claimed here. We couldn't even it seems like we can imagine what it's like to be blind, right? It's not the case that somehow just because I am not blind doesn't mean I can't imagine what it would be like for me to be blind. But the what it's likeness is a kind of mental type of experience that a specific kind of creature can instantiate, right? So the idea is something like what it's like for a human being to eat an In-N-Out hamburger versus what it's like for a Bernese Mountain Dog to eat a In-N-Out hamburger versus what it's like for a bat to eat an In-N-Out hamburger, right? These are the different kinds. There's different kinds of, there are different mental kinds that correspond to the different kinds of creature. And these kinds of experience, so different Bernese Mountain Dogs can have the same kind of experience because they have the same kind of mind, in a sense. Different kinds of bats can have the same kind of experience. They can have the same kind of what it's likeness because they have the same kind of mind. They are all subjective, but they embody a particular kind of point of view, and a particular point of view of a particular kind of thing, right? So the idea here is, what it's like for me to experience something. Well, then, I come to experience like what it's like to taste an apple. Well, for every other human being that has relatively similar taste buds, I guess, they can also have that same kind of experience. I have a particular point of view. My experiences are private, but for the most part, we can come to recognize that each of us can have the same kind of experience along those lines. That doesn't mean, though, that we are going to be able to know what it's like for a dog to experience eating an apple, or a bat to experience, flying around using its echolocation. So now, the physical facts that science is interested in generally are objective by nature. That is, they're accessible from many points of view. You know, how much a bat weighs is an objective fact. It's something that, you can put the bat on any number of scales and it will tell you, hopefully precisely, what exactly the bat weighs. It's a physical fact that is objective, and there's a easy number of ways of checking it from any point of view. The difficulty, though, in seeing how the facts about what it's like to be a bat are, is that we can't understand how those facts could possibly be physical. And part of the reason that we can't understand how those facts could possibly be physical is because those facts are subjective. They're not objective in a certain way. They are objective in one sense, that they really are happening. You really are having experiences. Bats really are having particular experiences, and those experiences are a particular way. It is objectively true that those experiences are a particular way. But the experiences themselves are subjective and thereby not accessible objectively from a number of different points of view. They the subjective experience just is a particular point of view. It just is a particular point of view taken, by the bat when it's flying around, by you when you eat an In-N-Out hamburger, by me when I, eat an apple. They're the experience that we're having, or that each of us is having in those cases, is a particular subjective point of view on the world. And that particular subjective point of view has the character of what it's like to take that particular point of view on the world. However, that doesn't get us to a physical objective fact. So here's another quote from Nagel. If the facts of experience, facts about what it's like for the experiencing organism, are accessible only from one point of view, then it is a mystery how the true character of experiences could be revealed in the physical operation of that organism. The latter is a domain of objective facts par excellence. So the problem again is that it just doesn't seem clear how, from the subjective point of view, there are the objective facts of the subjective point of view could be described in any serious way by an objective science, or a physical science. Here's another way of thinking about the problem. Typically, when it comes to cases of reducing things theoretically, and this is generally how physicalism works, reduction proceeds by excluding the phenomenological. That is, so here, think about it this way. According to science, heat, the phenomena of heat, is just the phenomena of molecular motion. You have more heat when you have the molecules moving around faster. Sensations play no role, right? Heat is something that we feel, but the sensation of heat is not heat, right? Heat is the bunch of particles bouncing around outside of you, and then you can feel the heat because you are close to or being bombarded by more of those particles. Sensations are used, however, to fix the reference of the term for the thing that we're reducing, right? So when you feel heat, that is, when you get close to like the stove and you feel heat, The thing that you're feeling, we're trying to, in science, we're trying to figure out what that thing is. And it turns out when we do a bunch of experiments, we find out that heat is just kinetic molecular motion. And the higher kinetic molecular motion, the more heat you feel. And so now the idea here is we've reduced something that you can feel, heat, to something else that's physicalistically explainable, molecular kinetic motion. So the idea here is that heat is whatever produces heat sensations in us. And so, you know what it's like to experience heat, but it's not that, the heat is something that is apart from you. And that's something that is objective and out there in the world. However, when it comes to reducing sensations themselves, there is no way to exclude the phenomenological, where the phenomenological is just what it's like, how it feels. There is no appearance reality distinction when it comes to sensations. So think about it this way. Heat can be reduced to, or we can talk about heat in terms of the molecular kinetic energy that is bouncing, the bouncing around molecules in a particular area, where that is just what heat is. However, pain, take the phenomena of pain. Well, what is pain? Well, it's not that pain is not something that occurs outside of the body and then somehow you feel that thing. It's not like, if you get hit by a stray baseball, that somehow the pain occurs in the baseball and then you're just, experiencing the pain as outside of you. No, pain is just your feeling of pain. There's no way if, ands, or buts about it. There's a physical thing that's happening out in the world, a baseball like hitting you, that causes the feeling of pain. But the feeling of pain just is a sensation that you're experiencing. So because the sensation is something that you're experiencing, it seems like we can't really, we can describe all of the physical facts that are occurring in your body when you're feeling pain, right? So you get hit by a baseball, your skin becomes a little bit damaged, your nerve cells send electrical impulses up into your brain. We can describe all of that stuff, but none of that stuff is going to explain why it hurts so damn much, right? Why the pain feels the way that it does, right? Back to heat. When we're talking about heat, we can explain why the heat, in a way, feels the way that it does. Why it feels so hot, right? It's because there's more molecular kinetic energy. But when it comes to pains, we can't use just a physical explanation to describe the way it feels, like what it's like. We can use a physical explanation to describe the things that are going on in your body, but we can't use a physical explanation to describe the feeling of pain. So, question then, does Nagel ultimately think that we can conclude that physicalism is false because we can't explain these subjective points of view? And ultimately, I think the answer has got to be no. The conclusion that Nagel comes to, and I think that this is in a way justified conclusion, is that it's just that we have to accept that we have no conception of how physicalism could actually be true. It's not that it's false. It's just that we don't know how it could be true. There is no physicalist view on offer that can account for the qualitative states and the subjective character of experience. All physicalism can explain is the physical objective facts. But if there's an entire other realm of facts, the facts about our qualitative states and how our subjective responses to things are, how our subjective experiences are, then physicalism just can't be the whole story, because physicalism leaves out an entire realm of facts to be explained. This brings us to another sort of case that is designed to establish something along the lines of the same conclusion. This is what's called the case of Mary and the knowledge argument. So Frank Jackson proposed this case, and here's how it goes. Mary is sequestered as a baby for apparently no good reason and placed in an all black and white room where the lighting that with lighting it makes her skin and such appear similarly without any color. She becomes, while in this room, as she grows up, the most brilliant scientist in history, and learns everything that there is to know about color vision, and about how the neural system works, about how our eyes work, about what wavelengths are going on when certain colors are reflecting off the wall. But the idea here is that she's never seen any colors other than black and white. In short, here, the idea is this: she knows all of the physical facts that have to do with seeing particular colors, right? So in this case, we'll say that with all the particular facts of her that have to do with seeing the color red. And then one day, we release Mary from her little, black and white prison room. And just outside the door, upon release, we introduce her to a red apple. Now, Mary's never seen a red apple before. She's seen apples, but only in black and white in her room. And now we introduce her to a red apple. So the idea here is she's supposed to know already all the physical facts. And now we've introduced her to a red apple. Question: does Mary learn something new? Does she learn a new fact? Does she now come to know what it's like to see red? Most people say yes. She has now learned what it's like to see red. That is a new fact that has come into her repertoire. She knew all of the physical facts beforehand, and now she knows what it's like to see red. If this is so, if Mary has come to learn a new fact, then it seems like we have a powerful argument against physicalism of any kind. So here's Mary's argument. Before leaving a room, Mary knew all the physical facts having to do with red, with seeing the color red. When Mary sees the apple for the first time, she learns something new, namely what it's like to see red. Therefore, what it's like to see red is not a physical fact or something that can be learned by merely studying all the physical facts. In other words, the conscious experience of seeing red is something that the physical sciences could never explain, even in principle, because they can only appeal to physical facts. So now, given these two cases, Nagel's bat and Mary the neuroscientist, it seems both cases seem to show that even if you have all the physical facts about mental states, you still need not, you still probably, you might not know what it's like to be in them, right? You could know everything that there is to know about what it's like to be, everything that you need to know about the physical facts about bat lives, about bat brains, about bat echolocation, and still not know what it's like to be a bat, what it's like to experience being a bat that is using echolocation to navigate a room. Similarly, if it's possible for Mary to have all of the physical facts about color vision, about the color red, let's say, and then come to learn something new upon finally seeing a red apple, it seems that the what it's like character of seeing a red apple is more than a physical fact. This finally brings us to what famous philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. So there's this thing that we might call the easy problem of consciousness, which is to explain how a physical system could believe, remember, perceive, so on, having these kinds of particular mental states. And most people think that functionalism as a kind of as a kind of theory of the mind, does a pretty good job of explaining how we could possibly, as a physical system, have these particular conscious episodes of believing, remembering, perceiving, and so on. The hard problem of consciousness is, however, to try and figure out how qualitative experiences depend on or relate to physical states and processes of our brains. That is, how certain subjective experiences could possibly be generated by the physical stuff that's going on in our brain. At the heart of Chalmers' sort of problem, or the hard challenge, the hard problem, um, are a seemingly simple set of questions, right? So, why does a particular neural firing feel this way? When you're in pain, there's a nerve firing that goes up your arm and into your brain. Why is it when a particular brain, you know, electrical node fires? Why does it feel that way? Like couldn't it feel a bunch of other different ways? Why does it have to feel that way in particular? Um, why does pain always feel the way that it does? Like, why don't pains sometimes feel differently? What exactly is the purpose of the feeling of pain? Um, couldn't there be some other state that plays a similar role as pain but feels different? Without some answers to questions like these, physicalist accounts like the computational theory or the functionalist theory are generally incomplete. They need more in order to fully explain everything. There is a kind of explanatory gap. Here's another case. This is what's called the inverted spectrum. Imagine the possibility that whenever you see the color red, it looks one way, but for somebody else, their color wheel is basically totally inverted. Whenever they see the color red, it looks another way. The issue here, though, is just that you were raised to call what the way that a strawberry looks red, and they were raised to call what a strawberry looks red. And so, whenever they see the color that they see a strawberry as, even though it's a different way, it seems very different to them as it does to you. They go about in their normal everyday lives in just the same way that you do, right? It just there would be no way, in a sense, to check against one another whether or not you guys both see the same color when you're looking at a strawberry, because you both learned the word red for whatever color it is that you see when you see a strawberry. And as long as things are consistent throughout the rest of the world when you're looking at these things, then it would be possible for someone to still, to someone to have an inverted color spectrum in their eyes and in their brains. The idea here being that it's possible to have very different subjective experiences, even though the physical facts are, for the most part, the same. And because of that, this seems like a particular problem for the physicalist. Something similar could happen with respect to pain, right? Why couldn't pain feel different to someone else but still play the same kind of role in the body, right? So suppose, like, when I experience pain, it's a little it feels like a prick, but when you experience pain, it feels more like how my itch feels, right? And for you, an itch feels more like a prick of pain, right? And they're just swapped. But that doesn't mean, the actual feeling in this case, like, you would still call the feeling pain, even though it's the feeling that I would call itchiness, because you were sort of taught that, right? When you were born and when you stubbed your toe and you felt that feeling, your mom told you that was pain, right? You might hate that feeling and avoid it as much as I do. Yes, it'll bear the same relation to all the other states of your body. Is this case possible? Um, yeah, maybe. I mean, why think so? Why think not? It's an interesting question. Um, uh, these kinds of issues give us certain reasons for thinking that functionalism, certain theories in the philosophy of mind, um, can't actually fully capture everything that we might want to capture about the mind. So finally, inspired by Nagel and Jackson, some philosophers have come to say that even if materialism is true, we will never actually understand or be able to explain the mind in fully physical terms. So the focus on those who push versions of this thesis where there is this sort of explanatory gap between the mental and the physical in explaining phenomenal consciousness, um, their intuition is this: no matter how much we learn about the structure of the brain or how much we learn about the brain's physical makeup and interaction with the world outside of it, nothing that we learn will ever be able to explain why we have these sorts of experiences. The experiences that we have, when we see the color red, when we bite into an apple, the feeling that of exhilaration that you get when you jump out of an airplane to go parachuting. Like, why do we feel these kinds of ways? Why are our experiences these kinds of ways? You could never explain that by learning more about the physical structure of the brain. No physical facts will ever be able to explain these qualitative states, or why we have these qualitative states as opposed to different ones, right? Or as opposed to none at all. It seems like the connection between the phenomenal or the qualitative states that we have and the physical, the way that our actual brain works, is in a sense arbitrary. So the deficiency of physicalist explanations is the explanatory gap. Physicalist theories have the resources to explain almost everything in the natural world, including most of the features of the mind, but no one has a very convincing story to tell about how qualitative experiences fit into the picture of explaining the mind. So, is there a way around this? Well, some people, like philosopher Daniel Dennett, are willing to bite a certain bullet and, in fact, just denies the existence of certain kinds of qualitative experiences, and, in fact, denies the possibility of inverted spectrum cases. But of course, just saying that something isn't possible isn't terribly satisfying unless you can prove it. For other philosophers, the problem is so hard that it's led them back to a view that is similar to dualism. The view that people hold nowadays that is dualistic in flavor is not substance dualism. It's not the idea that there are two different kinds of substance, the kind of mind that is, a mind substance and a body substance. Because that view again leads us to a very big problem, the interaction problem. In the views that people hold today, in Chalmers' view, for instance, what we get is a kind of property dualism. Here's Chalmers' view. Basic particles of matter have what he thinks of as non-physical properties. So he thinks, there are what we are is we are made up of atoms and electrons and everything like that. We are physical beings, but physical objects also have non-physical properties. In other words, everything that we are made up of also has some kind of mental or proto-mental property. So when you gather enough physical stuff together in the way that you do, that our minds are, or our brains are actually set up, you get a certain kind of experiential property that goes along with them. You get something like a qualitative or conscious level property that goes on in the mind. On this view, it's possible that some satisfy that you get basically a kind of physicalist explanation, but it's not purely physicalist. Now, it is, of course, possible that some satisfactory physicalist explanation will eventually be offered, but it's almost impossible to imagine what one would look like given what we currently know. So this, in the end, ends up being a kind of quest for a future science or a future philosophy of mind in which we know what consciousness could actually look like in such a way that we could explain it in physical terms. And finally, conclude with this. It would be a mistake. I think that, yeah, this is, I believe that this is from the Jackson article. It would be a mistake to conclude that physicalism must be false. It would be truer to say that physicalism is a position we cannot understand because we do not at present have any conception of how it might be true. At the present time, the status of physicalism is similar to that which the hypothesis that matter is energy would have had it if uttered by a pre-Socratic philosopher. We do not have the beginnings of a conception of how it might be true. The idea here being that, if physicalism is to be true, it's the same as it's us saying that it's true is the same as someone that pre-scientifically claiming that water is made of H2O. Like, what would that even be if they didn't understand what hydrogen and oxygen was? Like, how could they even say that? How could they even think that? Right? We would be in a similar position. We are in a similar position as someone back then claiming such a thing. We don't even know the steps forward in our own science in order to try to begin to explain how it is that we can explain the qualitative aspects of our mental lives in physical terms.